Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have just a powerful show coming right up. Our special guest today is Corinne Zupko, and she's here to talk to us about her new book, From Anxiety to Love, a radical new approach for letting go of fear and finding lasting peace. Corinne is an author, licensed counselor, and keynote speaker, and she's helped thousands of individuals through her one-on-one counseling and weekly meditation classes. Corinne also works with corporations with her weekly meditation classes and the largest virtual conference of A Course in Miracles in the world through the organization Miracle Share International, which she co-founded. So let's welcome to the show, Corinne.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
It's such a pleasure to have you here. And my goodness, I mean, we can all use a book that teaches us how to move from anxiety because it seems like so many people are dealing with that nowadays.
It is pervasive. I really feel that there's a continuum of anxiety from, the high end of the spectrum, which is where I actually spent a lot of my life, and then the low end of the spectrum shows up more as our everyday worries and fears, and so we all know this to some degree. Mm-hmm. It's pervasive, and the statistic is that I think it's 40 million Americans struggle with anxiety disorders, and so I actually believe that could be on the low side, but this is something that I think many people can relate to.
Well, and so how did this, I know you just mentioned that a little bit, but how did this affect you when you were growing up?
That's a great question. So my journey with anxiety began at a very young age. My first psychiatric diagnosis actually came at the age, I was around 2, maybe 1.5, somewhere around there, younger than I can remember. And I was diagnosed with separation anxiety disorder. My poor mother could not leave the room, else I would scream my head off. And that lasted for a number of years. I sort of grew out of it, but it was almost as I grew out of it, the anxiety started morphing and attaching to different things. So I had a number of phobias. I remember, and they were really silly things. I remember being afraid of going into restaurants because I was afraid I'd get a stomach ache. I was terrified of flushing the toilet because I was afraid it would overflow. Just really bizarre fears. And that then sort of grew into focusing on my health and being afraid, turn on the news. You hear about the latest horrible diseases and outbreaks, and I would just worry intensely that there was something wrong with me. And it sort of remained at a constant level of anxiety. It wasn't like super debilitating, but it wasn't normal. And of course, my mother got me into counseling, and we did the things in that area to try to help. But when I went away to college, I was a sophomore in college. I learned during finals week of the fall semester that a student who I didn't even know died very suddenly of meningitis. And he was at a party, supposedly, the night before, and found dead the next morning. And that just unraveled me at the seams because I just was convinced my own death was next. What if that was going to happen to me? How can this happen? And I remember calming myself down enough to get through the day and do what I had to do, and, of course, put on that smile so nobody knew what was actually going on. But 3 o'clock that next morning, I woke up in the middle of my very first panic attack, and I struggled then with panic attacks for years after that. So this anxiety thing has been a long-term issue. I'd like to think of it more as like a long-term teacher, shall we say, in my life. And it's something that is also in my family, but it really, I think, became particularly intense in my life compared to the rest of my family.
Well, I think a lot of people do that where they kind of slap on the smile, for that outward appearance, and they're really dealing with these really strong emotions inside.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And, now as I'm coming out with the book and I'm starting to tell this story, whenever a friend or somebody who knows me, somebody from the past is in the audience, I can't help but tear up because they had no idea. My college roommate who was literally in the bunk bed beneath mine the night of my very first panic attack, had no clue until I finally told her. I think it was my senior year. And so this ability that we have to have this sort of front that we show to other people when we just feel like we're collapsing on the inside is something actually I think that doesn't really serve us so well, because it can get in our way of getting the help that we need.
Yeah, for at least people to be able to move forward. Yeah, I think a lot of times, and it's so great that we're having this discussion, but I think a lot of times people feel like they're alone.
Definitely, definitely. You know, I was with a Buddhist monk earlier this week, and I was in this workshop with him, and he's from Sri Lanka, and he was talking about the difference in our cultures, where in his culture, if you have a problem, it's like, I would go to everybody. I have this problem. Help me. You know, what do you think? What do you think I should do? He said here, he's amazed at how he'll have a group of meditation students, and in the group, everybody's happy and smiling. And then when he meets with them individually, they're crying, they're depressed, they're unhappy, they're so sad, they have so many problems. And he said it's amazing how much we tend to hide our problems in our culture. And of course, there's exceptions to that. He was speaking broadly. But I think one of the biggest lies that anxiety tells us is that we're the only ones feeling this way. That's also why it's so important to me now to talk about it, because as I've talked about this, I cannot tell you how many people that I've come into contact with, even friends from high school and college, other family members who have reached out to me and said, Corinne, I struggle with the exact same thing. Thank you so much for giving voice to this, because I thought I was all alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it really helps people who are feeling like, gosh, you know, I'm stuck, or I'm the only one going through this, or I'm the only one feeling this way, when, you know, you come to find out that that's really not the case.
Yeah, it really isn't. It's so common, and I feel like it's a healthy thing to realize how common it is, that there's nothing wrong with you. You're not going crazy. It's just anxiety, and we can learn tools and learn from our anxiety in order to help us in our growth. Well,
and I know that, you know, the journey through anxiety is got to be just absolutely terrifying. You know, at the same time, it can be such a great teacher. You know, what are some of the things that you took away from all that?
Well, a lot. It is absolutely terrifying. I definitely want to validate that. You know, for anybody who's ever had a panic attack, I'm sure they can relate to the feeling of trying to describe it to somebody else, and there's no way to really impart upon another who's never been in those shoes of having a panic attack of how awful it is. Mm-hmm. So I became really determined to find my way through this in a way that really made a difference. I chose, even though I was in college at the time, I chose to not take any substances. I didn't drink. I didn't want to use anything, because I wanted to know where the source of my pain relief would come from. I wanted to know what would truly make me feel better. I didn't want to numb down those feelings with something else that might then impact my ability to kind of see where I was getting relief from. So with this idea of what I've learned from anxiety and what I have gained by viewing it as a teacher, one of the things that I learned is how my thought system is so based on fear, how I look out and I would see just everything that there is potentially to be afraid of, things that could go wrong, the what-if cycle. What if this happens? What if that happens? You know, you can just get so lost in that cycle. So in seeing how significantly impacted my thought system was of fear, and of course, you know, there's something very adaptive about fear. It's how, as a human species, we've survived, right? We remember to stay away from the cliff and stay away from Tyrannosaurus Rex. Fear has served us in that way, but it can also very much spiral out of control. In realizing that my thought system was very fear-based, I started to look at spiritual approaches that could help me begin to shift my thinking because it was not working for me. I really became open to questioning every belief that I hold, to kind of hang on to nothing, and instead develop that attitude of having a beginner's mind of just, I'm willing to look with fresh eyes. I'm willing to learn for the first time. Maybe my belief about X, Y, or Z isn't true. So I didn't stumble. I was introduced to a spiritual pathway called The Course in Miracles by my mom, and my mom had been a dedicated student of this pathway. But at this time, when I started having panic attacks, I was, I think, 19. And before that, being a teenager, my mom would try to talk to me about spirituality, and I'd literally do one of these where you, cover your ears with your hands and la, 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 I don't want to hear it.
Yeah. You're like, this conversation's not for me.
Yep, not for me at all. And so, my mom, there she was, hoping that I'd get into this, but it wasn't until I was in this place of just complete desperation that she offered it to me again. She said, Corinne, I really think it can help you. It's all about learning how to undo fear. I said, bring it on. I will try absolutely anything. So the anxiety taught me that the thought system that I was using in my mind, the fear-based thought system, was not working for me. And I just became open to finding another way. So the anxiety also helped me completely open my mind and be willing to be taught, be willing to learn, and to be willing really to have a new perspective.
Did you feel like when you were going through that process of just releasing everything that you believed in, that was kind of a scary place, or was it at that time, was it kind of like, you know what, I'm at kind of rock bottom with this, I'm just grasping for what will work?
That's a great question. It wasn't scary for me because I was already in so much terror. So I was already in such a high degree of fear over dying, over getting sick. That fear state was so skyrocket high that to sort of be open to searching for a new way and being willing to release those beliefs didn't feel scary for me at all. Instead, it felt freeing because I was in a place of acknowledging that whatever it was that I was doing, however it was I was perceiving, wasn't working for me. And so I was willing, like I said, to try anything.
Yeah, just kind of move anything forward. And so when you were doing that process, was it like you had this one big aha moment and then all the pieces fell in together, or was it just a continuous journey?
That's another wonderful question. It was definitely a continuous journey. The one aha moment that I remember is one of the very first times that I picked up the book, A Course in Miracles, and one of the very first phrases that I read was this statement that says, nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. And I literally went, huh? I had no idea what I had just read. But there was something in me that sort of lit up. There was something in my heart that was like, I want to ponder that. What does that mean? Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Here lies the peace of God. So that was sort of my little aha moment, but I didn't fully comprehend what was going on. What it was this sort of awakening of this loving thought system within me that exists within all of us, but that we often choose to not use because we are so addicted to fear. We're so addicted to our fearful thought systems and our worries and our fear thoughts that this quiet but very powerful, loving thought system just sort of, stays tucked away out of our awareness. And I feel like it was that part of me that sort of perked up when it heard those words. But from there, it wasn't like I just heard that and was suddenly better. We're talking years of work. I really dove in full, both feet into my study and my practice of A Course in Miracles because it was a spiritual pathway that just clicked for me. I think it's important that we all find something that works for us and study it and dive in wholeheartedly. The interesting thing was that I had, I think, about 11 years of studying the Course under my belt And then I actually ended up going through another very significant anxiety episode. This happened in around, I think it was 2009. And it had to do, I had some really significant job-related stress and some other things going on. And I had the summer off from my job, and about 2 weeks before I was set to go back to work, there was not one cell in my body that wanted to, and it felt like my psyche just exploded. And there I found myself in the middle of this gigantic, 2-week-long episode of just debilitating anxiety where I could barely get off the couch, and, my functioning was really, really low. It was at that point that I realized that I was kind of using my spiritual practice as a Band-Aid. I was doing what I would do, and then if I didn't feel good, I'd sort of run to it. I'd read something that made me feel better. Then I'd put it down, and I'd go back to whatever it was that I was doing, not actually fully putting things into practice, really just using it as a Band-Aid. And I through my willingness and through this openness, this self-honesty that I was committed to, I noticed that. I had been using it as a Band-Aid. So at this point in 2009, 2010, I really started putting these principles into action of listening and being willing to listen to that loving voice in my mind. And I noticed the anxiety started to fall away. I started noticing this shift within me, and I started writing what was helping me, the exact principles of A Course in Miracles that were really, really helping me. And the result is my book. The result is From Anxiety to Love.
Mm-hmm. I find it fascinating and just, fabulous that not that you've gone through this hardship, but you've come out the other side in such a way that you're really helping kind of be that light for people who are kind of looking for that way out as well.
Mm. And thank you for saying that. I can't help. I literally had to write this book. It literally had to come out of me. And part of the reason is that I was so blessed to have such an open-minded mom who had this spiritual practice. I was so blessed, her and my stepdad as well. I was so fortunate. And I know that there are many folks out there who might not have that spiritual parent that really is also a mentor in a spiritual practice. And so my hope is that this book can be that spiritual parent for those who suffer from anxiety like I did, and can use it as a beacon and my example as knowing that there is hope, that we actually can live with an anxiety-free life and with happiness and with joy, and that even if you have that lifelong issue with whatever that issue may be, that there is hope. One of the early reviewers of my book had said that they felt that the book really can apply to any problem. It doesn't have to be anxiety. It can be applied to relationship problems. The process, that I talk about can be applied. And that's absolutely true. So the book is really a gateway. The anxiety is the gateway to the book, but it can definitely be used for anybody who's looking to shift their minds and have a different experience, one based on love.
Well, and what's so fabulous, too, in having your book, from anxiety to love is, for a lot of people, A Course in Miracles, it can be kind of a tough read. And you do have to be part of a group or, have people that you're working with in regards to kind of getting through it. It helps to move through it. And so having your book kind of gives I wouldn't say cliff notes, but it gives a direction for people who want to be part of a community, but also might not want to, because, again, A Course in Miracles is kind of it can be a difficult read for some people.
Mm-hmm. I had a friend who was an English major in college who had said to me, she was like, I want to start reading A Course in Miracles. And I was like, okay, just so you know, it's a tough read. She was like, oh, I was an English major. It'll be fine. And then a few weeks later, I hear from her. She's like, forget the English major. I have no idea what this book is talking about. So you're absolutely right that it's not an easy read at all. For folks who do want to start it, I always recommend starting with the Manual for Teachers, which is in the back of the book, which is much more digestible and understandable, and also the workbook, which has one lesson for every day of the year. But I definitely tried in my book to break it down as simply and as clearly as possible so folks could get that jump start on understanding what the whole process that the Course teaches is about.
Well, and so to kind of piggyback on that, so a lot of people, when we talk about A Course in Miracles, are like, a miracle, wow, that sounds like that's like a 1 in a billion thing. I don't think it's something that really applies to me.
Mm-hmm. There's a quote in the Course that says, miracles are natural. When they do not occur, something has gone wrong. So in other words, they're not these big, oh my gosh, look, it's a miracle types of events, but rather we can think about miracles in one of two ways. The first way, and actually the most frequent way that miracles are referred to in the Course, are expressions of love. So as I express love to another, that part of me that is love is joining and connecting with the love in the other person. So every time we express love, we're expressing miracles. And these are natural, and when they don't occur, when we're not expressing love, something's gone wrong, meaning we've lapsed into judgment, we've lapsed into fear, we've lapsed into, criticism, whatever it may be. So that's the first definition of a miracle. And then the second definition, which actually I mostly focus on the second definition in my book because the second definition is a shift in perception. So it's literally this change in perception from a thought system or a thought based on fear to a perception or a thought based on love. And I focus my book mostly on the second definition because that was really what I needed because I was so far gone and so down and out with anxiety. But both definitions are really important. So again, miracles are natural. If they do not occur, something has gone wrong. If we're not allowing our perception to be shifted from fear to love, we're blocking love. We're just getting in the way and saying to ourselves, hey, I know what's best. I know what everything is for. I got this all figured out. And then it just takes one, life event or one maybe a minor thing at work to kind of feel like, we have the rug yanked out from underneath us to realize that, we don't know a thing. We don't know what anything is for. This world can be really unpredictable. So this willingness to be open to having our perception changed from fear to love is a really wonderful, wonderful way of experiencing a miracle.
And it's so powerful when people realize that they can experience miracles every day. It doesn't have to be the Buddhist monk or the saint. It's available for everybody.
Yes. We are all special. We are all equally special and all have this ability to experience miracles all the time, which is really awesome.
You gotta love that. Well, and so now, we've been chatting about miracles. Let's talk about, this, and I know you talk about this in your book, the inner therapist. What is that, and do we all have one?
Yeah, great question. Yes, we all have one. The inner therapist, which is what I refer to in my book as your intuition, your inner guidance system. In Course in Miracles terminology, it's Holy Spirit or inner teacher. Really, the words that we use don't matter. It's this idea that there's something in us that remembers love for us. So love is what we are made of. I very, very, very much believe that. But we're out of touch with that. We've forgotten that. We've lapsed into fear. And we believe that we're separate from one another, separate from our source, that we're limited to these bodies. So our inner therapist is sort of there as the bridge. It's the bridge to helping us remember the truth about ourselves. So it's this part of our very own mind. It's nothing outside of ourselves, but it's a part of our own mind that will allow this miracle process to take shape. In other words, I ask for a miracle all the time of my inner therapist, whatever it is, that I'm going through something or need some help or recognize that I need a shift in perception. I trust that it's this part of my mind that remembers love that is going to exchange my fearful thoughts for a loving thought instead. It's going to exchange that anxiety for love instead. And it's a part of our minds that we all have. Another way of thinking about it is that we have this fearful thought system in our mind and a loving thought system in our mind. And our inner therapist is part of that loving thought system. And so by turning to this healing part of our mind, that's helping us return to our loving thought system, and it opens our eyes to the awareness of love in everything, and helps us really begin to remember the truth about ourselves, which is love with a capital L. I'm talking big love, like big universal love from our source.
Well, and I'm glad you said source, because a lot of times people, when they see A Course in Miracles, they may think, oh, I have to believe in God or some type of religion or something.
Right. So source, you can, however you want to conceptualize that works. I don't believe, of course, it might make it easier to study the Course if you do have a spiritual belief system, only because the language it uses is very spiritual. But if we can sort of see beneath the words and instead practice the concepts, the words we use become meaningless. Words are just symbols for something. And so, like I said before, if you think of your source as love or nature or God or divinity or whatever way you want to think about it, make it work for you, and take what you like and leave the rest. So I very much believe that it's not the words that are important, but it's sort of the concepts behind them. So anybody can benefit from this.
Well, and that really leaves the door very wide open for people. So it doesn't matter where you are in your spiritual journey. You could be someone who's very analytical, and this still would apply to you.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So the analytical piece, I think, really perhaps might be very like folks with that analytical mind might absolutely love the Course, because that density that we were talking about of how hard it is to read really appeals to the analytical mind. And I feel like that's an appeal, but that can also then get in our way of studying, because we can sort of get stuck in intellectualizing all of the principles. In other words, oh, I know what to do. I just need to choose fear to love, and, I'm asking for help. And we can say the word, but not actually do it. And I feel like when I described my experience before of realizing that I was kind of using my spiritual practice as a Band-Aid, that's sort of what happens, is that I found for myself I could say the right words to myself, but not actually put it into practice, not actually get still and get quiet and, trust that I've asked for a miracle and that it's going to show up when I'm ready. So that analytical piece, I think, definitely serves to get us hooked, and, if we have an analytical mind, but it can also get in our way if we're not aware, if we're not careful.
Yeah, and not really, at least being open to it in other ways, because the mind can get it and the heart's kind of like, well, wait a minute.
Right.
Working it out.
Yeah. It's interesting, because I've heard a number of Course in Miracles folks say that they felt like the Course very much brought them into their heads. And so they've moved on to look for other pathways that bring them into their heart. And in my experience now with the Course, if a miracle is an expression of love, how much more heart-centered can we get? That second definition of that shift in perception, I think, has been the very predominant definition of miracles, and we've kind of collectively sort of ignored the expression of love a little bit more. And so I've really found that in opening to this idea of miracles being expressions of love, it's really brought me into my heart. It's really brought me into this willingness to connect with others through that heart place, and know, for instance, if I'm going through a challenging experience with someone, and I share a number of these examples in the book, that there's a way from my heart that I can work with that, rather than getting, caught into the traditional attack mode, defense mode that we all know really well.
Well, and for a lot of people, it's really easy to kind of just, get into that defense mode, because, it's just kind of part of the mechanism that they've been either brought up with or they've been trained to do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's attack defense is something based on fear. We think that somebody is going to get one on us or, take advantage of us in some way. And so we need to be in attack mode, ready to defend our whatever, whether it's our own minds or things or beliefs, whatever it may be. And the Course actually teaches that in our defenselessness, our safety lies, that if we are truly love needs no defense. It just is. We don't have to do anything for love to be. It just is. And so we don't need this cycle of attack and defense. And in my book and in the Course, I try to make it clear that the attack-defense loop is really a closed loop. We can think of this, I said fear-based thought system, but the Course uses the term ego to describe that fear-based thought system. It's happy being a closed loop. It's happy staying in attack-defense. We have to ask for another way. We have to ask for that miracle that shifts out to see through love, to experience love once again, to help us out of that closed loop.
Well, I'm so glad that you brought that up because I've got just a list of questions here for you. And, of course, we'll probably never have enough time to get through all of them. And people, of course, will, go and get your lovely book, From Anxiety to Love. But in one section of your book, you do talk about, down the ego rabbit hole. So, you touched on that a little bit. What does that even mean? Because when people's going, gosh, I think I need my ego to stay alive or it's serving me,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, first of all, there's a number of different ways that we might define ego, but the Course is very specific in the way it defines it, and it's defining the ego as our belief in separation from each other, our belief that we're bodies, our belief that we're separate from each other.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's not our truth, that's just a belief that is kind of in the way of us knowing our truth. So down the ego rabbit hole in that section, I'm really talking about descending into fear, going down this rabbit hole. And my sort of reference is to Alice in Wonderland, where everything down the rabbit hole is kind of like, twisted and a little peculiar and in some cases totally just upside down. This ego rabbit hole, according to the Course, is kind of like the world as we know it, where things can be really unpredictable. Things happen that don't make sense. But this ego idea is really just the voice of fear in our minds, this small self. So here's another concept that I know that I dive into a lot in the book, and another one that might be helpful is that we can think of ourselves as having two selves. In other words, a small s self or a capital S self. And it's the small s self that is based on fear, that's based on separation, that believes that we're just these bodies. And it's the small s self that really is this belief in an ego, in a separate identity. As we have experiences, as we have miracles, as we have shifts in perception that open our eyes to the fact that we're something much greater than a body, we start to shift our identity from this small s self to recognizing that there's something much bigger that we are, way more awesome. It's a capital S self, I like to think of it as, and it's this self that transcends time and space, that is pure love, that is eternal, that is all these beautiful things. And that if we could lead from that place of that capital S self, in knowing the capital S self, anxiety can't exist. It has to fall away. So I like to think of it as, the more we remember, and this is a process, believe me. I'm not saying that I'm there. I'm in this process of being dedicated to remembering that capital S self. And in my experience, as I've gone on this pathway of being willing and wanting to remember that capital S self, that's when my anxiety really started to fall away. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it sure did. And, I think for a lot of people that would be so helpful, kind of knowing, gosh, this is a path I can take. And it's interesting, regardless if it's with anxiety or stress or just our spiritual path, it's always something that's continuing to unfold in front of us. We come up to new new situations or, a new level. And then we look at it and it's our opportunity to really practice what we've been learning.
Yes. I'm so glad that you said that with that phrase. It's an opportunity to practice what we've been learning, because it's it's definitely an ego trap. So it's like a voice of fear trap to be on a spiritual path, and then something just like blows up. It goes totally wrong. And that fear voice that comes up is like, oh, you didn't do your spiritual path right, or you're not as advanced as you thought you are. That fear thought is, number one, not true, that it's really important for us to remember that everything that comes up in our journey, even if we start having anxiety again, if, it's been gone for a while, but it shows up again, it's always just an opportunity to practice what we've learned, to put our skills, our loving miracle practices that we've been learning into practice, because we need those opportunities to practice them. I know for me, it would get so easy to just sort of like feel better and then start coasting again and not really engage with my spiritual practice, not really meditate anymore, just kind of be like, oh, I'm feeling good. Okay, I'm going to just, go back to doing what I was doing. And what I find is that, the first judgment that slips in, the first fear thought that slips in, I'm already now kind of going back into the ego rabbit hole, and I don't even realize it. So it's so important for us to be willing to maintain this awareness of where our minds are, and also to not see any quote-unquote setbacks as setbacks, but to see them instead as opportunities. That's been key for me, is to not judge ourselves for quote-unquote, having a setback.
Well, and you kind of touched on this a little bit too. You talked about meditation. You brought that up. How much did meditation play a part in all of this for you?
It played a part in that for years. So it took me 4 years to get through the lessons in A Course in Miracles the first time. So there's one lesson for every day of the year. So there's 365 lessons, and the first time I went through them, it took me 4 years. The lessons, many of them really are forms of meditation. So I did start learning how to sit still and get quiet and close my eyes. Not all of them are like that. Some of them, you might not sit. You might just go about your day and repeat some phrases to yourself. But as I continued in my journey, I discovered mindfulness meditation in 2005 when I took a training with Jon Kabat-Zinn, who I'm sure many listeners know is really the person responsible for mainstreaming mindfulness-based practices in the U.S. And something clicked in me in going for this training, because it's all about getting into the present. And in the present is where our inner therapist abides. In the present is where love is. It's where miracles are. Fear can only exist if you're thinking, if you're getting tripped up in future thoughts, if you're getting tripped up in past thoughts. Bringing yourself into the now, more often than not, we're here. There's peace in the now. Now, in this very moment, is where love abides. So even when there's chaos around us, we have this ability to actually bring ourselves into this moment and take refuge in this moment. So meditation did become a very important part of my healing process, because if you think about it, if you're always asking your inner therapist for a miracle, like for instance, the simplest prayer is help me. If you're always saying, help me, help me, help me, help me, help me, but you don't shut up and get quiet to listen and tune in to guidance within your own mind, within your own heart, we're not going to receive the gift that's there waiting for us. So that piece of getting quiet, I think, is really important, even if it's like 2 minutes a day or 3 minutes a day, just starting out really small and building from there. And the reason that I love the practice of mindfulness so much is that you can be doing this even while you are, I'm looking at my kitchen sink, so washing dishes. You're never washing dishes. You're only washing the dish. I think it was Dr. Andrew Weil who I first heard that from, or maybe it was Thich Nhat Hanh. I don't remember, but it's so true that if we're present with washing the dish and just feeling the soapy water and feeling the hot water and maybe the smell of the soap, that's bringing you into the now. That is a form of mindfulness meditation. It's an informal practice because I'm not sitting down and closing my eyes, but if I'm refocusing my attention on one thing, and if I notice my attention wander and I choose to bring it back, that's strengthening my ability to tune into the present, and in my experience, it strengthens my ability to tune into the inner guidance within me, the voice of the inner therapist.
Well, and it's such a great exercise to be able to just, do that connection, like you're saying. What advice do you give people if they say, you know what, I can't really meditate because, my mind's going too much?
I would first say, number one, you're normal, that your mind is going too much. We all have monkey minds. We have minds that go from one thing to another, to another, to another. That is normal. So one of the best things that somebody who's just starting out can do is, like I just described, practice washing one dish at a time, or go brush your teeth. And while you're brushing your teeth, rather than walking around, maybe doing something else, stand there and just fully experience what it feels like for those bristles to be touching your teeth and gums, what the toothpaste tastes like, and just notice each time your mind wanders and just bring it back to what you're doing. The reason we call it a practice is because you are literally, moment to moment, sometimes needing to bring that wandering mind back over and over and over. So for somebody who feels like they can't meditate, start with these informal practices. And then when you feel ready, set a timer and sit on your couch for 2 minutes and close your eyes and just feel your feet on the floor. Maybe just wiggle your toes and just feel your toes and your feet as they're touching the floor. Or sense your breath as you sense the in-breath and out-breath. Just try to really notice what's happening in your torso. There's all different tools and anchors that somebody can use to help stabilize their mind. But I would always just say start small. Mindfulness to me is like the type of meditation for people who think they can't meditate because you absolutely know how to pay attention. You know how to do it already. And so you're just strengthening that skill on purpose as you're practicing mindfulness.
And that makes it so easy. And you obviously have been, you know your stuff because you know how to get from point A with all this to point B. And there's so many people looking for a way out. So I applaud you, just not for the courage that you've had in your journey, but, writing this book and helping other people move forward because it's such a big deal.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. You mentioned the word courage. And I really think that all of us need to own the places in our lives where we have courage. Sometimes it's courageous just to get up out of bed in the morning. That's a courageous act if, we're really feeling like we're really struggling. It can be courageous to walk out the door, to interact with folks that you feel uncomfortable around. I'm so glad you said that word about courage because it's really been coming home to me lately and realizing, I'll be totally honest with you, when some folks started receiving advanced copies of my book, when I started sending it out for endorsements, it was like, oh my gosh, what have I done? Everybody is going to read what's happened, what I've gone through and some of these very personal stories. And I just wanted to run and hide. A couple times I just sort of went, into my room and just laid down and wanted to just hide my head under a pillow. And I had to really come to recognize that it takes a lot of courage to put yourself out there. So if there's bloggers or writers or anybody who puts themselves out there either online or just in front of other people or even is just vulnerable in front of your friends and family, that takes a lot of courage. And that's a beautiful thing because the more we can step into our own courage and share with others, the less we get caught in that trap of feeling like we're the only one. Because I can guarantee for anybody who's listening, whatever problem it is that you think that you have that only you have, you are not alone. There's no way that you're alone in that. And I really learned that as I've gotten very open about my anxiety journey in terms of how common this is.
Oh, yeah. I know people who have had really difficult times with anxiety and worry and panic attacks, and and I know that you talk about also, just advice that you offer for people who are going through panic attacks. Is there anything that they can do that would kind of help minimize it a little bit?
Yeah. So I was a therapist for many years in a college counseling center, and there were occasional times when we were called because at one time in particular I can remember somebody was having a panic attack in a stairwell. And what I had this person do, and what I do for myself, is oftentimes we clench or tighten our bellies. Culturally, we're told we have to have, flat stomachs, right? So we suck in our stomach, and we end up breathing from really high up in our chest. And you can test yourself right now for this. For folks who are listening, if you're able, you can place one hand on your belly and the other hand on your chest. And just breathe. Just breathe as you naturally would. And notice what hand is moving more. Is it your belly or is it your chest? Which hand is doing most of the moving? Chances are, for most of us, we are chest breathers. We're breathing from up high, which is a more shallow breath and a breath that can be associated with more stress and anxiety. If we can just soften our belly, immediately that's a more diaphragmatic breath. We get more oxygen. It's a more relaxed breath. That can help to calm us down. So in the stairwell time for myself, I would lay there, and it's easier to do it lying down because you just don't need any muscles, to hold yourself up. Just totally focus on softening your belly. That's it. Just releasing those abdominal muscles to just soften the belly, because that can allow you to start breathing more normally again, because usually in panic attacks we're starting to breathe too fast and hyperventilate and take in too much oxygen. So that can be a really helpful thing. Another thing is to remember, actually two things come to mind. Remember that you are not going crazy. That's the number one fear that I've heard through the years of folks who are in the midst of a panic attack, is thinking that you're going crazy. You are not. You're just having a panic attack. And you don't have to have a diagnosable, quote-unquote, mental illness like an anxiety disorder to have a panic attack. A perfectly healthy individual can have a panic attack. It can just happen. I teach also the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, in some of my graduate counseling classes. So anybody can have a panic attack. So it's important for us to know that we're not going crazy. And panic attacks occur in linear time, meaning they have a start. And if they have a start, they have an end. It might feel like it's lasting forever, but it will come to an end, because panic attacks don't last forever. So if we can remind ourselves that if we're having a panic attack, it can help to calm us down and help us move through it.
Yeah, it's such a big deal, because I've had one myself, and they're not fun. And so when you have one, it's like, ooh, what am I supposed to do here?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
They're the worst.
Mm-hmm.
The worst.
For sure.
I feel like, in my case, it was always like a feeling that I'm about to die. Many folks, and I don't know statistics on this, but a lot of emergency room visits for people who think they're having a heart attack ends up just being anxiety and a panic attack. So your heart does all wonky things, and, you feel lots of tingling and sensation throughout your body, and you get that tunnel vision. So it's not a fun experience, but it will come to an end. It will come to an end.
Well, and so what final thoughts would you like to leave our listeners with today?
I would love for folks to remember that there is always hope. No matter how hard things are, no matter how out of control things seem to be around you, no matter how clueless you might feel in terms of how you're going to work through a problem, pause, turn within, and ask your higher mind for help. Be open to another way. Be open to another way of seeing, and be open to solutions that you had no idea could possibly happen. I can't tell you how many times I thought like, well, this situation that I'm obsessing over is only going to work out this way, or it's only going to work out that way. Mm-hmm. And guess what? It ended up working out a completely different way that I never anticipated. So the best advice that I have, in addition to remembering your hope, is to do your best to keep an open mind and trust that you have the ability to choose a miracle in an instant. You have this ability to be open to a new way of seeing and to experience a shift within.
Mm. And that's such a beautiful place to be. My goodness, people, especially if you're struggling with anxiety and you want to move from one place to another and just move through that, there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, there is. There definitely is.
Well, so where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about your book and be part of your community?
Folks can go to my website, which is FromAnxietyToLove.com. I have a number of resources there. On Facebook, I'm Corinne Zupko, that's CORINNE-ZUPKO, and I also have a podcast called From Anxiety to Love Radio, where I talk a lot about undoing anxiety with A Course in Miracles. So hop on over to my website and connect with me on social media. I'd love to get to know you.
Oh. Well, Corinne, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun.
Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Thursday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.